In this episode, we chat with Mark Frank, the CEO and co-founder of SonderMind, a company which has redesigned behavioral health to increase access, expand utilization, and improve clinical outcomes. SonderMind's individualized approach to care starts with using innovative technology to help people not just find their therapist, but find the right in-network therapist for them. From there, SonderMind's clinicians are committed to delivering best-in-class care to all people by focusing on high-quality clinical outcomes. Prior to co-founding SonderMind, Mark founded 3 other successful ventures, including Next Oncology, TermScout, and SafeImageMD. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to subscribe.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Thank you, RJ. It's really good to chat with you as well.
So as I was kind of reviewing and refreshing on your background, I noticed you've had multiple endeavors. And so it's very appropriate for this podcast about entrepreneurship. I always think like the first one is probably the hardest, probably where you experience the most challenges, but you evidently knocked it out of the park. Can you tell us about that first entrepreneurial journey, Next Oncology, how you ended up pursuing it, what prompted the idea and caused you to really take that leap of faith and jump in on the risk?
Yeah, it was the hardest. I was just talking recently with a former SonderMind employee who is starting her own venture now. And as she was leaving, she asked for some advice. And I said, the hardest thing in your first venture is dealing with the day-to-day ups and downs, week to week, month to month, but it really is almost intraday where you'll have this win in the morning and then this other thing that happens. And the mental yo-yoing that you have to experience is unlike any other role. And so that was the advice I gave her. I would share that with everybody else. I started what was originally called Denver CyberKnife. It became Innova Cancer Care, and Next Oncology was the management service organization that I created around it. Really because I wanted, to get back to Colorado. I wanted to leave investment banking and I wanted to build a business and get back to my roots of leadership and things like that I had started in the Army. And so the jump for me, while it was certainly risky from a financial standpoint, I kind of cut my family compensation by about 70% and then signed a bunch of debt guarantees because myself and the outside investor financed it with some equity, but almost a 10-to-1 debt to equity ratio, which was personally guaranteed. And I will say the time to sign personal guarantees is when you have almost no net worth. So I was levered about 10x my net worth. I basically put all my money, which wasn't that much, and said, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm bankrupt, but I'm not starting with that much. So that's kind of a good place to do it. And it was really, I wanted to be in healthcare. I was already in healthcare and investment banking, and I wanted to build a business that could help people. And so this business was a radiation oncology company. We were treating cancer patients who had brain tumors, lung cancer, prostate cancer, spinal tumors, et cetera. And really, it was a financial success, but I think even more important to me was it was an educational success. I learned healthcare from the ground up. I built my own billing department. I built my own marketing department. I did all the direct-to-consumer marketing. I did the referral marketing. I had salespeople running around building referrals. I worked with insurance plans. I did all the commercial contracting with commercial payers, dealt with Medicare. And then we were treating patients who were coming in every single day with cancer. And so built, an experience where, our health grades rating was like 4.9 out of 5 with hundreds of reviews. And so really was a clinically sound business. And that was my driving force there.
At that time, I could see how you could really deliberate about like, should I do this or not? You said you cut your, compensation by 70%, you levered up. I think many people have this thought process, I want to do something entrepreneurial. I want to start my own business. And they begin collecting information. You never have perfect information, right? So What compelled you to say like, okay, I have all the information I need and I'm going to go for it?
So the starting place was I operate from this point of view that there are three legs to the stool of kind of like the combination of professional, like sort of an individual, I won't say happiness because it's not about, but sort of satisfaction or content. And that is as it relates to sort of your professional life. One, do you like the work you're doing, like the actual work? Two, do you feel like there is a fair compensation, whether that's current or future state, meaning like you could be betting on equity, but that's your own delineation? And three, do you have the time and bandwidth to do the things that you want to do that are not part of work? That again is a different equation for everybody, so it's like, do you have the time to be able to control your schedule and be with your family or whatever? So for me in investment banking, I was only hitting one of those things at that point in time. The compensation bucket was sort of like check mark, but the other two were not, those other two legs of the stool were not there. And so that was what the driving force. So that was a calculation of the risk for me, because I said the risk of actually staying where I am means that I will be on this wobbly stool for a long time, and the compensation piece will get bigger and bigger. So let me do this now, because if I wait, it'll be very difficult for me to pull that trigger rationally. Mm-hmm. Two, and maybe my risk equation is just different than maybe the average person. I don't know. But I looked at this going, look, the downside is in a year or two, this business fails and I'm declaring personal bankruptcy and we have no money and anything like that. But at the end of the day, I've got a good background. I've learned a lot. I've learned that I'm terrible at starting companies or running them. That's good to have that knowledge versus not knowing that. And I can go get a job somewhere else. And maybe it'll take some time. It'll be a setback. But I felt like that was not that risky. I was like, well, that's okay. I can build back from that. And, again, the risk equation was at that point was 5 years removed from being in Iraq for OIF1. So I was also like, look, there's no mortars coming down on me and things like that. There's no risk of IEDs in the road. So it's not that risky, like I'll still be alive and I'll be able to spend time with my family. And I had a son, started my first business. I've since had, I have two more kids now. So, we had three kids in 3.5 years. That was like, I want to do this now before I feel even more pressure from having a family and needing to sort of support our needs.
And when you're doing the mental math of that compensation component, saying, I'd be super happy if in 5 years the business was doing X, and I was making, Y, would you say that you set your goals more ambitious than you ended up, or was it modest and you kind of reached above that?
Well, I like algorithms and I like modeling and things like that. I was a computer science undergrad, and I, as an investment banker, you do a lot of financial modeling. And so I, of course, had my various scenarios that, I could play around with different triggers. And so the upside scenario ended up being probably about 50% lower than what the actual outcome was. So it was another learning, right? Which is like, I always approach entrepreneurial ventures through the lens of, let me be on the conservative end of most entrepreneurs and let me actually be realistic and then change as that goes, right? So on day zero with that company, I didn't expect it to end up where it was. On day zero with SonderMind, I didn't expect it to end up where it was. I thought it was a possibility, but I was like, let's be a lot more conservative about what we can do and let's build toward that. And then as we get traction, as we get confirmation that this works, we continue to set our goals higher and higher.
I love that statement or quote about people often underestimate what they can accomplish in 10 years. They overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year. And, exactly. And that's been my experience as well. And it's interesting to hear that you ended up doubling actually what your upside scenario was. So let's switch over to SonderMind. How did you come up with this idea? It seems like the timing was correct.
The timing, well, it was probably early, given that I founded SonderMind and co-founded SonderMind with my co-founder, Sean Boyd, in 2014. And it was driven by two sets of personal experiences. One was, like I mentioned, I had three kids. We had three kids in 3.5 years. It was a lot of stress. And I was trying to find a therapist and use my insurance. And I knew healthcare, right? I was running a healthcare company. And it took me months to find a therapist who was available, who took my insurance, who was the right fit, who was geographically proximate, who had the right scheduling dynamics, et cetera. But I went through it. I found somebody. Okay. And then there was the other side of the coin, which is my younger sister is herself a therapist. And so I'd seen her journey and her struggle in starting and growing her private practice as a therapist. And I was like, there must be solutions for this. And there really weren't. So I started researching and was very skeptical that there weren't other solutions out there. I was like, this must have been solved, right? Like this has been solved everywhere in healthcare. And co-founded SonderMind with Sean Boyd, where our focus was originally on how do we make these therapists more successful? And by doing so, can enable individuals to have higher access to quality care, to be able to use their insurance and ultimately be able to use that care. And at the end of the day, actually use technology and build a comprehensive solution that ties all of it together to understand how can we improve our overall mental well-being, which for us, that means driving outcomes, right? Like, it's one thing to go, let's get you into care and make sure that you can use your insurance and you can see your therapist in person or on video or whatever. But it's another whole thing to say you're actually getting better and you're able to stay at the higher level of mental well-being. And that's been our driving force from the beginning, even back in 2014, when we were just, again, starting incrementally. It was like, let's solve the provider problem, let's solve the client problem, let's solve the insurance plan problem, let's solve the health system hospital problem, and let's wrap it all together into this comprehensive solution.
It still seems like there could be a lot of folks out there unwilling to engage in therapy, simply because maybe in their minds there's this hurdle of oh, how do I find someone that I actually want to talk to? So market penetration, is it still way below kind of where you see a normal penetration run rate?
At the end of the day, we have a mental health crisis in this country. So it's about access to care. And what you said is some people are unwilling to engage in care and therapy, but it's not just that, right? We used to talk a lot in the company, and we still do today, about the fact that when somebody reaches out to try to find a therapist, that's a moment of courage. That's a moment when they're saying, I need help, right? For whatever is going on in their life. And so as we've built our comprehensive offering, really it's taking everything from meditation and digital tools all the way through to therapy and medication management and everything in between. It's been, how can we lower that barrier, right? Again, incrementally, it was, let's lower the barrier by solving the problem for the therapists and making it easier for them. And then let's lower the barrier by making sure that they can engage in insurance and that people can then use their insurance. And then let's remove the barriers by improving the technology tools that we can offer to therapists as well as to clients, which means patients. And now, with a handful of acquisitions and a lot of product build, we have this complete offering, right? Which is, you can engage with SonderMind via the meditation tools, via improving your sleep, via ways to improve your mental cognition and memory, and have digital assessments. And that's maybe that's before you're ready for therapy, or while you're in therapy, you can engage in those, or when you're done with therapy, right? You say, I'm going to continue to engage and sort of manage my mental well-being. All the while, it's when you have that moment of courage, when you have that high moment of need, we're here with, over 5,000 active therapists, with insurance coverage across every of the 15 states that we operate in, including Medicare, to say, you can use your insurance. You don't have to come out of pocket. This is high quality. And then it's always been centered around the key is engaging with therapists and ensuring that they can deliver the highest quality care possible. And then we just deal with all the other stuff that they don't want or need to deal with.
Thinking about this market, presumably it's anyone, who's struggling with mental health. I'm wondering if you somehow segment the market, and maybe say this particular population is most vulnerable, or we tend to see most of our patients coming from these types of situations.
So there are a lot of companies in the space that have done that. I would say our approach has always been, the hardest thing to pinpoint is actually what's ailing you when it comes to mental health, right? I mean, in fact, therapy is really about uncovering the thing that you don't know. If you knew specifically, all I need to do is this thing and I'm just going to go do it, then the utility of therapy is actually lower, right? It's really about, how can we get past your biases? How can we get past those things that are in your history that you may not be aware of how they're affecting you? How can we get past these other confounding factors? And so great SonderMind therapists do that. And via the technology that we've built, we can start to pull in other data points that can make it easier for a therapist as well as you as an individual to start to understand and to piece together, well, you know what, on Tuesday, my mood is worse. Every Tuesday in the afternoon, what's going on there? Is it something I'm eating? Is it because the weather's bad? Is it because I have my one-on-one with Mark and he really stresses me out? It could be any of those things, right? But if you start to uncover those, it's like a mystery, right? And so I think we've taken this comprehensive approach to say, how can we look at it holistically and solve the problem? Because it's, in my opinion, quite difficult to segment either by diagnosis or by demographic, the real need, at least in today's world. My hope is that in 10 or 20 years, hopefully sooner than then, we and others like us have been able to somewhat crack that code and to say, now we have a better way of understanding like what is actually ailing you from a mental health standpoint.
This idea that many people are suffering from loneliness has become prevalent. And I think I even heard in Great Britain, they have like a minister of loneliness. How much of mental health do you think could be solved or at least alleviated by socialization and finding friend sets?
Okay, this is Mark talking personally as opposed to Mark talking as like a clinical expert. Personally, I think there's a huge opportunity there. There's a book I read recently that actually talks about this. It was a British author, and it goes into the fact that the isolation that's sort of been happening across societies all over the world. And I don't want to be like the boogeyman that is social media, but it's a factor in it, right? And I would say the digitalization of our society as another factor is we've become more isolated. And so building communities and building human connection is personally, I believe, one of the strongest ways to improve one's mental health.
So, I'd like to talk a little bit more about entrepreneurship. One question I like to ask is, do you think entrepreneurs are naturally set up to be entrepreneurs, or are they made and developed over time?
I think they're made. There's a book by Lloyd Shevsky, who's a professor that I had of entrepreneurship at Kellogg called Entrepreneurs Are Made, Not Born. I think I might be missing up the title, but I fully believe that. When I started the first company, I thought, you know what, this isn't some super unique idea, right? And I thought, I don't have the ability to sort of come up with unique ideas. And I've started a couple of the companies besides SonderMind after that first one, or actually kind of parallel starting with it, that were pretty unique ideas. And, I think it's really just paying attention from an idea standpoint. But it's at the end of the day, being a successful entrepreneur, maybe it has only 5% to do with the idea, and it has 95% to do with execution. Right. And it has 95% to do with how do you actually run and operate a business and build and, attract talent and investors and people to get on this ride with you and say, we're going to do something different. We're going to build something that doesn't exist today. And anybody can do that. And it just takes a meaningful amount of hard work and a lot of grit and a lot of stick-to-itiveness.
What's the best insight you've developed at being an entrepreneur that you would kind of impart on another entrepreneur?
One thing I say to all budding entrepreneurs is be your own biggest skeptic. In the earliest days, doubt every idea that you think is there, everything that you're saying. Just say, this has probably already been solved. And if it hasn't been solved, it's been tried 100 times and failed 100 times. So let me understand why it failed. And by doing that, you can start to uncover, if it has been tried, you can uncover what actually were the failure points. And that can lead to those unique innovations and those unique kind of nuances. And if it hasn't been tried, then you might go, why hasn't it been tried? Right? Like maybe it actually is being solved in another way. Maybe the problem is not as big as it is. So I would say to everybody, be your own biggest skeptic.
And what's your philosophy around starting multiple companies versus owning one and building it for the long term?
So I was at once accused accurately of being a parallel entrepreneur, which is different than a serial entrepreneur. Serial entrepreneurs, you start one, and then you go start the next one, then you start the next one. So if I take a point in time, in 2015, I had just sold Next Oncology. I was in the process of selling SafeImageMD, which was a digital platform for storing and viewing and sharing medical imaging data. I was leaving TermScout, which was a software SaaS company that was selling tools to salespeople at companies like Comcast and Level 3 and CenturyLink, as well as commercial real estate companies, salespeople there. And then I had started SonderMind a year before with my co-founder, Sean, and was about to sort of like really kind of focus all my time on that. The advice I got that I completely ignored was, you will not be as successful if you don't totally focus on one. And I was like, nah, I don't buy that. I'm going to spread the risk and diversify my portfolio, if you will. And the advice, besides the fact that it burns you out, your brain needs to be able to focus when it's turned off, subconsciously on these problems. And having too many of them, it doesn't totally eliminate. But for most people, at least for me, I don't think I was able to be as effective. Now, hey, Elon Musk, he can do it, right? But I'm definitely no Elon Musk, right? So for us, average human beings, it's important to really focus on one.
It seems like you have been able to kind of manage multiple endeavors simultaneously. Would you have done it a different way?
I think SafeImage was way too early, and it didn't have the requisite focus for myself and my co-founders in order to be as successful as it could have been. It was fine. We got it to cash flow positive. We sold it. It was successful. It was successful. I said we didn't raise outside capital either, so we did it all nights and weekends and bootstrapped it completely. My first company, though, I was totally focused on that for the first 4 years. That was like all my effort until it was really just running. And then SonderMind really didn't start to grow until it had all my and my co-founders focused, in kind of like early 2016, and really start to build the thing that we were building. It took all that focus. So I'd say yes, you can sort of do it, but maybe not with the level of success that one would hope or expect for.
Very interesting. Okay, last two questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and there's a lot of people who've had such an amazing impact on me. One who comes to mind is my battalion commander when I was in the Army, when we deployed to Iraq, was a tremendous, tremendous leader. He really turned our organization around. He came in and sort of improved it materially in a very short period of time. He had a huge focus on attention to detail and a high degree of urgency. And he and I became relatively close. So he was a really strong leader. He himself had outstanding success in the Army, even past that point. So he recently retired as a 4-star general. General Perna is his name, Gus Perna. He was the COO of Operation Warp Speed, if you remember that whole thing going on during the COVID vaccination distribution. So he had tremendous success, rising to be a 4-star. And during the time, 20 plus years ago that he was my battalion commander, was such an influence for me.
Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I'm really passionate about youth. I have 3 kids, and so it stems from that, but that manifests in engagement with the public school system here in Colorado. All 3 of my kids are in Denver public schools. With youth mental health, I'm on the board of an organization that's focused on Medicaid access for youth for mental health services, and then youth entrepreneurship and leadership. So whether it's through West Point Society of Denver and other organizations that are doing things for youth leadership, often in the high school ages, or youth entrepreneurship programs that I can try to speak at or get involved with, anything that's about building up the next generation to propel our country into kind of continued leadership and being a beacon in the world is something that I'm quite passionate about.
Excellent. That's a good note to end on. Well, Mark, I want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, RJ. Really, really enjoyed it.